I want to talk about the question, who made God? Did you know that this question is the number one question on Google about God? More people ask this question about God than anything else on Google. In Richard Dawkins' famous book, The God Delusion, I think it's 9 times in the book, he asks a form of this question, who designed the designer? In fact, he says that it is the central argument of his book. So this question, who made God, is a question that a lot of people have. And I want to give 5 answers to this question. There are very good answers to this question that explain the answer to who made God. Now, the first answer is actually an answer that a friend of mine gives when he's asked this question by children at school. And what he does is, when he's asked this question, who made God, which is a perfectly fine question for kids to ask. It shows that they're thinking about God. When he's asked who made God, he asks them a question back in return. And he says, if God was made by someone, would God still be God? And when the kids hear this question, they take a minute or two or a few seconds to process it, and most of them eventually say, no. If someone or something made God, God wouldn't be God. And they're perfectly right. If something or someone else made God, well then that thing would presumably be God. God would just be a creature. He would just be part of the universe. So this shows us that God cannot have been created or made or designed by someone else and still be God. It doesn't completely answer the question, but this first answer shows that there is a problem with the question, who made God? God cannot have been made. So there's the first answer to the question. Now, the second answer is an answer I sometimes give when I'm asked this question, who made God? And I want you to imagine that there is nothing. We're not assuming anything. We're not starting from any point. We're just looking at a universe that we live in, and we're asking the question, where did our universe come from? And I call this answer to the who made God question the 4 options answer. Because I think there are 4 answers or options we can give to the question of where the universe came from. So the first option is that, well, maybe the universe just popped into existence from nothing, with no cause, for no reason. The problem with that answer, it doesn't work. That answer is irrational. It doesn't make sense. We all have seen magicians pull something out of apparently nothing, a rabbit out of a hat. And we know that actually you can't make a rabbit come from nothing. You can't make a white dove come from nothing. You can't get something from nothing. That's irrational. So that option doesn't work. You can't get a universe from nothing. Someone has put it this way, from nothing, nothing comes. So that option for where everything came from doesn't work. What about a second option? Some people and a lot of atheists think, well, maybe the universe has just always been here. The universe is eternal. But there's a problem with this option too. You think of a car. Do cars keep on going forever? No. Very soon you need to fill up the fuel tank. The car will stop going. Even if you keep on filling up the fuel tank, after a while, after a few years, the battery will die. The car won't start. Even if you keep on replacing the battery, after a few years, the tyres wear down and run out. And even if you keep on replacing all these things, eventually different mechanical parts of the car die, wear out, stop working. And eventually, even if you keep them all working, the body will rust. And the problem with our universe is that nothing keeps on going forever. Nothing in our universe is infinitely continuing. Everything runs down. And this means that if our universe was infinitely old, it would have run down and worn out, and we wouldn't still be here. You think about the sun up in the sky. The sun up in the sky, it burns through fuel. And so do all the stars in the universe. If our universe was infinitely old, it would have run down, and by now it would have suffered heat death. It would have hit the big freeze. Everything would have died. So our universe can't be eternal. It can't have always been here because it's running down. That's just the way things in this universe are. So there's the second option. The first option, our universe just came from nothing for no reason, no cause. That's irrational. Second one, by experience we know that the universe can't have always been here. So here's a third option. Some people say, well, maybe there was a chain of causes, just like we come from our parents and they came from their parents, and this chain goes on and on and on. So maybe some people say the universe is like that. It came from something else. So A came from B, came from C, came from D. Now the term that's used for this is an infinite regress, an infinite chain of causes going backwards. However, this idea doesn't work either. There's a funny story about a man who was giving a talk about science, and as he was giving the talk, a lady stood up at the back of the room and she called out and said, "You're wrong. That's not the way it is." She said, "The world is a flat plate that rests on the back of an elephant." And the man who was giving the lecture very politely asked her, "So, okay, what is the elephant standing on?" And she said, "The elephant is standing on a giant tortoise." And the lecturer said, "And what is the giant tortoise standing on?" And the lady said, "It's tortoises all the way down." Now, you can't really have a universe operating like that. I imagine in that lecture theatre, at least half of the people wanted to burst out laughing at the absurdity of the answer. You cannot have an infinite chain of causes going backwards eternally either. For the same reason that you can't have an infinite universe, you cannot have an infinite chain. You think of dominoes. Sometimes we set up dominoes in a series of them, and we topple down the dominoes. And when we do that, there is always there's a chain of dominoes, but there's always a first domino and a last domino. You don't have an infinitely long chain of dominoes, a chain of causes knocking each other over. You can't have it infinitely long. Even if you put those dominoes in a circle and they look like they will keep on going round and round, when you start toppling one domino off over and they bump against the other one, you'll have a first domino that falls and you'll have a last domino that falls. They don't keep on toppling forever. So the idea of an infinite regress of causes, an infinite chain of causes for our universe, that doesn't make sense either. And that leads us to the fourth option, which is the correct option for where our universe came from. There must have been a first cause, itself uncaused. Because you see, if this first cause had been caused by something else before it, it wouldn't be the first cause. It has to be uncaused. And this is how we talk about God. God is the first cause, himself uncaused. And by uncaused, we mean that God has always been there. God is eternal. So this process of looking at these options for our universe leads us to this fact that there must have been a cause for our universe that wasn't caused by something else. And that's something, the first cause, itself uncaused, is God. So again, we come to the conclusion that to ask the question, who made God, is an illogical question, because God is the first cause, himself uncaused. It's as illogical as asking, who is the bachelor married to? To ask who made God is to ask who created the uncreated one. So again, here's my second answer to the question, who made God? And it's my 4-option answer. And it is that we cannot keep on going back forever. There has to be a first cause, itself uncaused. And that is how we talk about God. God is therefore eternal and uncaused. Now, my third answer to the question of who made God is what I call the two-option answer. You see, some atheists will say that a Christian like me, I believe in an eternal God, and the atheist says, well, I believe in an eternal universe. And there's the two options really. You can either have an eternal God or an eternal universe. The atheist says, you choose an eternal God. I choose to believe that the universe has always been here. Now, the atheist is right about one thing. There must be something that is eternal. But the atheist is wrong in saying that the universe is eternal. We know that the universe had a beginning. We know that the universe cannot have been going on forever for the reasons we talked about earlier. So there's the two-option answer to the question. Either the universe is eternal or God is eternal. And there is far more evidence that the universe had a beginning than the other option. So again, it is more logical to believe that God is eternal. Therefore, no one made God. He is eternal. Now, my fourth answer to the question, who made God, is what I call the Albert Einstein answer. Albert Einstein didn't give this answer to the question, who made God? But Albert Einstein, in the early 20th century, he published a number of scientific papers about relativity. And he argued that time is relative. Time is not something that's fixed, and that time can be affected by various things, including gravity and motion. We don't need to go into all of that. But as a result of Einstein's theories of relativity, scientists came to realize that the universe must have had a beginning. And they showed that the universe is expanding, and if you go backwards in time, it would have been, all the matter in it would have been closer to each other until you came to a point where all the matter in the universe was condensed into a very, very highly, infinitely dense point, from which at time zero the universe came into existence. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Einstein proved that not only did the universe have a beginning, but that time itself had a beginning. At the beginning of the universe, t equals 0, time equals 0. Before that, there was no such thing as time. So this means, again, that the universe had a beginning, and that the cause of the universe, God, he is not part of time. He is not governed by time. He created time along with space and matter and energy and the laws of nature. All of those things, including time, came into being at the point of creation. And now God created and caused those things. Therefore, God is not part of time. And that means, think carefully, this means that God is timeless. He transcends time. He is eternal. Again, we come back to the point, to the conclusion, that God cannot have been made because God is beyond time. God doesn't work in the same way everything else in our universe works, where it has a beginning and an end. God is timeless and eternal. There's the fourth answer, the Albert Einstein answer. Again, we see that God is eternal. Nobody made God. Now, the fifth and the final answer to the question, who made God, is called the Kalam cosmological argument. The word Kalam comes from medieval Islamic philosophy. Medieval Islamic philosophers, they came up with this argument, and I've got to say that I don't really like this argument. It's a perfectly valid logical argument, but I don't think it works very well for the ordinary person in the street. But the Kalam cosmological argument says this. It's got 3 points. Number one, everything which had a beginning has a cause. Number two, the universe had a beginning. Number three, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, a lot of people, when they hear this, not just atheists, but ordinary people, they think this is a bit of a trick. It's a bit of a philosopher's trick that's being played on me, because I would normally expect the starting point to be everything has a cause. But instead, the Kalam cosmological argument has reworded to say everything that has a beginning has a cause. And the atheist says, well, if everything has a cause, God must have a cause. So who made God? So the atheist doesn't like the way this starts out. They say everything must have a cause. The Christian comes back and says, oh, but God doesn't have a cause. God didn't have a beginning. God is eternal. And the atheist says, well, why are you making a special exception for God at the beginning of your argument? You seem like, right from the get-go, you're assuming that God is eternal, instead of proving it. So there's the first problem with it. It seems like a setup, and it doesn't seem to be a very fair way to ask the question, because it makes a special exception at the beginning of the argument and says God doesn't have a beginning. Now, children in school, if there's a teacher's pet, or in a sporting contest, or if an umpire favours one side, people don't feel good about special exceptions being made for teachers' pets or special favouritism shown to some team in a sporting contest. How is it fair to make a special exception for God at the beginning of right at the beginning of this argument? That seems to set the whole thing up in an unfair way. That's the atheist sort of, and even the ordinary person in the streets response when they hear this argument. So I have a lot of sympathy with that complaint. And that doesn't mean the argument is wrong, the Kalam cosmological argument. What it means is that the Kalam cosmological argument has tried to be too cute at the start. It has packed in all of these other arguments I've already made about how the universe, it must have had a beginning. It can't have been here forever. It can't have been made from nothing for no reason and without any cause. It can't be the result of an infinite regress, a chain of causes. The universe must have had a beginning, but this introduces the fact that there must have been something that caused it that was the first cause. So what this Kalam cosmological argument does is it packs in, and this is my second problem with it, it packs in too much information into its starting premise, where it argues that, well, maybe there's something that didn't have a beginning, and therefore it says everything that had a beginning, has a beginning, had a cause. So it just makes it too simple and too neat. If the Kalam cosmological argument had 7 points and went through all these other options for where the universe came from, I think the ordinary man in the street would be a lot more comfortable with its conclusion. But it's perfectly logically valid once we understand all of these other options for where the universe came from. So philosophers like to use this argument, but the ordinary person in the street doesn't feel very comfortable. They feel like they're being tricked here. But it again shows and again proves that no one made God, because while the universe had a beginning and therefore has a cause, God is different. He is the cause of the universe. So there are 5 arguments, or 5 answers rather, to the question, who made God? And I think they're good arguments. And even children understand these arguments. They're not hard to understand. God must be eternal. By definition, God is the uncreated creator. He is the first cause, uncaused. The philosopher William Lane Craig responded to Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and Richard Dawkins' argument, who designed the designer, or who made God. He responded in an article in a book himself. And I'm going to read you what he said at the end of this article. He said, "Several years ago, my atheist colleague Quentin Smith unceremoniously crowned Stephen Hawking's argument against God in A Brief History of Time as the worst atheistic argument in the history of Western thought. With the advent of the God delusion," says William Lane Craig, "the time has now come to relieve Hawking of this weighty crown and to recognise Richard Dawkins' accession to the throne. In other words, William Lane Craig is saying that Richard Dawkins' argument, who made God, is the worst atheistic argument in the history of Western thought. And I have to agree. I think the argument, who made God, isn't a very good argument. There are very good reasons believing that God is eternal. For more on a lot of these issues, check out my new book, Why There Really Is a God. It gives 16 arguments for God's existence, and it also answers a number of atheist objections to God. Having done that, it also answers the question, well, if there's a God, who is the true God? It talks about what God is like. So the book again is called Why There Really Is a God and What You Need to Know About Him. Check it out. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like and share and subscribe to my channel, Why There Really Is a God, and look out for other videos.